Got it? All good? Yep. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming along. Greatly appreciated. And hello to all the people online, if I hope it's working as well. I should explain my title. The reason I called it Planet Saving for Beginners is because it's mildly amusing and, more to the point, it's not irrelevant either, because if I understand the climate science correctly, CO2 emissions are still going up, planet's still warming up. We haven't really started on the process of fixing things up. So presumably at some stage we might, but at this stage we haven't. So, and I think quote unquote, luckily there aren't too many really young people in the audience today, because normally if I have a few young people in the audience, I feel almost obliged to issue a health warning and give them a heads up in case they get easily depressed about the state of the environment and the state of international politics. We might want to make a rush for the exits, but I think we'll probably, this is a room full of consenting adults, we'll probably be able to cope, I hope so. But anyway, that's an excuse for the title. Now, how do we work this? Not like that. Not like that.
You help?
Do you do psychological counselling? Hey, what did you press? This one. That one. I pressed that. Nothing happened. Okay. This is just a reminder of where you are, in case you've forgotten. And I'm putting this up because, as you can probably see, I'm not in the first flush of youth. And when I was comparatively young, I can remember these photos appearing. And because of the first time we were able to take photos of the Earth from space. And it seemed like, and not just to aging hippies and other people, but it seemed like at a moment there was actually a sort of change in consciousness amongst people around the planet, because this was the first time we'd ever seen ourselves from space, as it were, and recognized that this is where we live, we're all on one planet together, and we're all kind of in it together. So there was a moment of heady optimism about a change in thinking and our relationship with each other and the world, and etc., etc. As you probably noticed, didn't get too far and didn't really get sustained. So that's a bit unfortunate, but it's worth keeping it in mind, I think, because that's the kind of nature of the problem that defines us as well. This is a picture from an article I wrote for Pearls and Irritations about baby boomers, and this is the picture they chose to use with it. And so don't blame me for that one. But it's kind of indicative of my generation. The baby boomers are, I think, I could be slightly generalizing here, but I don't think they're terribly popular with younger people for a variety of reasons. But I think in the defense of baby boomers, I would say we didn't mean to stuff things up. I mean, and it's not absolutely all our fault, because we didn't understand some of the things we were doing. And to be fair, this is true of human history generally. When the Industrial Revolution was invented, people didn't really think, well, this is going to really stuff the environment up in 100 or 200 years time. So we can't always see what's ahead of us and what's coming. That's what's different now. I mean, now we do know what we're doing, what the implications of some of the economic and political and social structures that we've designed, invented, happened upon, what they're likely to do to us and what the implications of that might be. So baby boomers have got a bit to answer for. And I think what's worth keeping in mind about that generation, my generation, people like certainly Trump and Putin maybe, not obvious baby boomers, but they maybe just don't get what a difference there has been in the way that the environment is deteriorating, about the prospects for the future, the idea that in America in particular, everybody's kids are going to do better than their parents did and have a better quality of life. I mean, that is absolutely a non-starter now. I just don't think there's any doubt, with or without Trump, it was a non-starter. But now it's definitely off the agenda. But whether people of this generation kind of get that in the way that maybe they need to is another issue. Now, I've got a few slides. I've got mixed feelings about slides, but just give you something else to look at. And some of it is vital empirical data. I think an audience like this, turning up for a talk like this, you've probably got a pretty shrewd idea about all this, but this is just a reminder of the facts, as it were. And the fact that the facts are in doubt. And are not taken seriously by some people, particularly the most important man in the world, is profoundly depressing. And I should say, one of the reasons I like plagiarizing these kinds of slides is I'm not a climate scientist. And if we had to wait for me to discover what global warming was and the greenhouse effect, we'd be waiting for an awfully long time. But I do understand an intellectual division of labour. That's why I worked in universities. I know a bit about international relations, and quite a few people know an awful lot than I do about climate science. And I'm quite happy to take their word for it about what's going on, what the greenhouse effect is, what the likely implications of global warming. I mean, what basis would I have for possibly arguing with them? I know next to nothing about that. But I recognise that they're recognised by their peers and they know what they're talking about. So that's not a bad starting point. This is a map of doom about all of the terrible things that are going on in the world and the collapse, dieback. I mean, it's just gloom and doom around the world, unfortunately. And I think the only thing we know is it's likely to get worse unless we do something about this, because we know what's causing it. We know what the possible implications are. We can't be precise about the dates, but we've got a rough idea about what's going on. So it's kind of bizarre that we don't take these kinds of things more seriously than we do. You'll be pleased to have, I think I've only got one more of these sort of slides. So this is a good one because this demonstrates Australia's unique contribution to the apocalypse, as it were. So because Australia, as it shows you on this particular chart, is on a per capita basis either the highest or one of the most highest contributors to this global problem in the world. And poor old, all these sub-Saharan African countries, which are at the sharp end of climate deterioration, have done absolutely nothing to cause it by comparison, and yet they're suffering from it more than everybody else and don't have the capacity to be able to respond to it. Because that's one of the slightly unfair things about this whole thing. Not only are we contributing to the problem, but we've got a more capacity to respond to it in creative and reasonably effective ways than many of the countries who are suffering and done nothing to contribute to this. So it's grotesquely unfair at one level, the whole business. But that's the nature of things. And I think we need to recognize where we are and what our contribution has been and how outsized it is, because it seems to me, at least, because of this, because of our, quite remarkable by global standards state capacity and ability to do things, we should do something that is practically useful and morally defensible. I think we've got an obligation morally to do something about the situation that we find ourselves in because we've made an outside contribution to it. So that's something to think about, it seems to me. Oh, sorry, there is another one of these. But this is just giving you an idea of the kind of impact that we've had as human beings and the kind of things that we eat. I read in The Economist the other day. Oh, here's a good quiz question for you all. How many chickens do you think we collectively eat a year? Anybody know? I'll put you out in misery. 17 billion. I mean, it's just an astonishing number, isn't it? So I know quite. That's not per person, but it is an astonishing number, and a lot of chickens aren't happy about this. They will come home to roost, I'll tell you. So, but anyway, you can see the kind of problems that we're facing, and part of it is domesticated animals are a problem, and the wild bits, the environment that hasn't been stuffed up by us yet, and our animals, is becoming smaller and smaller. And the kind of wild marine life is a classic example of what's known as the tragedy of the commons. This is a famous kind of idea that was popularized by Benedict Eubanov. Is the answer to this? Oh, who was the tragic tragedy of the commons man? Pardon? Who could nobody know? Oh, I'm shocked and aghast. Garrett Hardin. Well done, Ed. You get tonight's star prize. So a dinner date later on in the evening. So yes. So it was Garrett Hardin had this idea about the tragedy of the commons, and it was the idea that people will, left to their own individual devices, will exploit things until there's nothing left to exploit. There's no incentive to not do this from an individual basis because they assume that everybody else will. So there's no collective approach to some of these problems. And that in microcosm highlights all of the problems that we face, it seems to me. So, I think that's the last of my gloom-inducing slides. But, oh yeah, let me say something about Western Australia, where I come from, and from a huge different distance and huge expense for poor Ed, who's paying all the bills this evening. But Western Australia has got a lot to answer for. And I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of state capture, but this is a state that really has been captured by the fossil fuel industry and the politicians there. Mark McGowan is a classic example. He was the former Premier of Western Australia, in case you've forgotten, but he was in cahoots with the mining industry and waving through all kinds of deals and expansions. And this Northwest Shelf gas project, does it tell you how much? 4.3 billion tonnes of carbon. And this is at the same time that the Australian government is going around telling the population of the Pacific that we're really concerned about them. They're part of our Pacific family. And yet they are opening one of the biggest emitters of fossil fuel in the world, and certainly in this country's history. And Mark McGowan, the Premier who waved all this through, is now, where is he? BHP, Mineral Resources and Bondi Partners, which is an organisation run by Joe Hockey, if you remember him, former treasurer. And it's just a lobby group for the fossil fuel companies, basically. And Mark McGowan gets a thumping salary from them, and he also gets more than $250 million per annum for life as his superannuation package from the long-suffering West Australian taxpayers. So, I wrote an open letter to Mark McGowan as well that was published. And I just asked him, what do you tell your kids when you're sort of trying to justify your action as Premier and in your post-Premier position as a champion of the fossil fuel industry? Didn't get a reply, you won't be surprised to hear. How self-interested, self-serving and greedy are some of these people? And what, it's not true of all politicians. I'm sure there are some good ones. I haven't met any of them so far, but I'm sure there are. But this is kind of where we're at. And the point about this little slide is that you've probably heard of the great GST carve-up, where WA managed to negotiate having a floor on the distribution of the general, what's the GST stand for? That's the one. Yep. So goods and services tax, they had a minimum, put it in as a floor, and that's non-negotiable because WA is an important state for the Labour government staying in power, so nobody's going to argue with it. So people in WA, they won't even share their wealth and good fortune with the rest of Australia, never mind the world. And that's kind of what we're up against, getting a sense of collective destiny and action as being part of what we need to do if we're going to address any of these problems. And don't look to WA to lead the way on this, I'm afraid, because they're just self-absorbed, insular, parochial, all of the things US and status say about us. It's all true, I'm afraid. So there you go. Oh. Global environmental governance. There's a little definition for you, which I plagiarized from somewhere, and I can't remember where. So if you recognize your own work, apologies to you, but it's quite a reasonable sort of definition. But it's a reminder that maybe norms and rules aren't really enough when it comes to really shifting the dial, as they say these days, on big and important issues that are likely to affect individual national interests. And we've had a whole series of these summits, and they're well-intentioned. It's undoubtedly a step in the right direction. And some of the people who turn up at these summits are undoubtedly well-intentioned, enthusiastic, but policymakers in their respective countries often take no notice of them whatsoever. And people are very skeptical about the usefulness and impact of some of these agreements. And there's a couple there that you probably know about. And the worst ones were the last couple. I mean, it's almost, if it wasn't so serious, it would be quite amusing. But this one was held in the United Arab Emirates, one of the biggest fossil fuel economies in the world and polluters. This guy, whatever his name is, Sultan Ahmed al-Jabbar, doesn't even believe in climate change. He's wildly enthusiastic about our ability to live with expanding fossil fuel production and have a sustainable environment at the same time. So I don't know quite what he's on, but I'd certainly like to get my hands on some of it, whatever it is. So, but this other figure at the bottom here about fossil fuel lobbyists outnumbered the delegates by 7 to 1. I mean, it's just astounding. I mean, they shouldn't be allowed to go, in my view. I mean, but call me an authoritarian if you like. But I just cannot see the point of them turning up. Well, I can see it from their point of view, but from our point of view, as citizens of the world, hoping that these kind of organisations and get-togethers will do something, it's not really very optimism-inducing. This is the last one that was held in Azerbaijan, another country that's not famous for its creative and progressive attitude towards environmental management and cooperative activity. A lot of people didn't even bother turning up. And from now on, of course, the United States, they're probably not going to turn up to any of these things because, of course, climate change doesn't really exist. To quote Mr. Trump, it's a big con in his famous speech to the United Nations the other day. So lots of people didn't turn up. And the amount of money that was pledged and may or may not be delivered was nothing like what's required. And again, I think the developed, in inverted commas, industrialized West, which is predominantly the countries that have caused all of this problem, they have a moral obligation to help out those people and countries that have been on the receiving end of some of these kinds of problems. And it's just not happening at the moment. And the idea that these get-togethers, however well-intentioned they initially were, are going to be the venues to make real progress on this, I think is unfortunately wishful thinking. And I'm not sure what the alternative is, but this is clearly not doing the job that we need to see. So this is, I mean, I'm being a little bit provocative here, but I do think that, I mean, I am a bit of an aging lefty. I put my cards on the table, but I do think that capitalism, as currently constituted, is part of the problem rather than the solution. Now, lots of people who are far more powerful, influential, and rich than I am think exactly the opposite, that there are, if you leave things to the market, it will help to bring about the most efficient utilization of resources and the most efficient models for addressing this kind of problem, and that there will be technological solutions that will be developed by innovators left to their own devices because they will see a profitable opportunity in doing something about it. Now, I just don't think that's an accurate description of what's going on in the world. I think the problem is profoundly deep-seated, and that point I was making about Garrett Hardin and the difficulty that individual preferences can constitute in terms of doing something about the environment is very difficult to overcome when we are all pursuing. I mean, I flew over here to get to do this talk. Could have done that online. You probably wish you now that I had that, because you could have switched off and all gone home. But that's the nature of things. I think it's difficult not to contribute to the problem, however well-intentioned you might be. But some people obviously have more of a capacity to do something useful and effective about this sort of thing than others. And it seems to me that there will need to be greater forms of regulation about what can and cannot be done, and disincentives applied on a widespread basis. Taxing air travel, for example, taxing movements of international financial capital, the so-called Tobin tax, because that does absolutely no good that I can understand, at least anyway. So that would be a useful thing. Develop a bit of money to do useful things that the private sector won't do left to its own devices. So I think we do need some regulation and some control over the way that we behave individually and collectively. Is socialism any better or more attractive? You might be thinking, what's this boy on? Obviously not, given the historical record of socialism in Soviet Union, and dare one say in China too. But it seems to me, and you can tell me why I'm wrong about this, I'm happy to hear it, but it seems to me that unless we develop some different approach to our the way that we organize societies and our relationships with each other, which is based in a more collective understanding of where we are, what the implications of our aggregate individual decisions actually is, unless we can develop that sense of different sense of consciousness, then I think we're in a bit of a tight spot. Let's put it delicately. So, but anyway, we're happy to debate that because it's not too far. Yes and no. Here we go. Oh, this is good. I don't know how many people have heard of degrowth. Lots of people here. Oh yeah, okay. We're smart audience, ANU, of course you have. But anyway, we're not doing this either. I mean, in some ways, it's not surprising because if you look at my little diagram here, which I've also plagiarized off the web, I mean, it's great. I mean, it's as an ideal type and as something to kind of think about as a useful kind of model, you can't fault it. Is it going to happen? Absolutely not. Because, I mean, who's going to buy into this? Who's going to take it seriously? You can just see Albo getting up at the next election and saying, well, we've seen the light, we're going to have a bit of degrowth, and this is what we're going to be doing from now on. I mean, it's just not really that likely a story. But I think, you know, my feeling is, I think that people like Jason Hickel, his work is really worth reading it if you haven't discovered it already. Very smart guy, but I think he's right about some of these things, that there are just limits that we can do about what we can do in terms of our individual preferences and the way that we live and the things, the amount that we consume, and those kinds of issues. And unless we do some of these things and take these kind of ideas seriously, then again, I just don't see how technological fixes and those other kinds of things are going to be able to do the kind of job that some people expect. And vested interests are, of course, very powerful and very unwilling to take any of this kind of stuff seriously. And I think they would think that anybody putting up a chart like this and saying, what do you think of this? Should we take this seriously? Would not be taken seriously at all. So that's partly what we're up against. Oh, now I should say, apologies to the sensitive members of the audience, but this is not actually a quote from me, although I do support this and I quite understand why Mr. Trump might have been described this way. The person who actually came out with this description of the most powerful man in the world was Rex Tillerson, who you may or may not remember from the Trump first administration when he was Secretary of State for a couple of years. And he had a close-up view of his boss for quite a long time. And this was the conclusion he came to. And I think it's not unreasonable, given some of Trump's utterances, given his grasp of history, given his grasp of the present day, is wildly at odds with reality, some people might say. And what he's doing to the United States at the moment is unprecedented in many ways. And many serious commentators think that America is well on the way to becoming an authoritarian state. And all of the fabled checks and balances are being systematically dismantled. And key institutions like the Supreme Court have been stacked with people who are sympathetic to the Trump administration and its ideas. And so there are no obvious barriers to him continuing his push towards a more authoritarian regime, including sending troops into various cities in the United States, which he doesn't approve, and locking up people without any kind of judicial oversight. So it's a really serious moment in American history. And of course, because of that, it's a really serious moment in everybody's history, because America, for better or worse, is still the most powerful country on the planet and still has an overwhelming capacity to be able to influence the way that the world works and the kind of collective problems that we face. And this famous quote from Mr. Trump, drill, baby, drill. I mean, he's just given the fossil fuel companies in America carte blanche, not that there were really that many restrictions on them anyway. And the point is that it's not just a waste of 4 years, which it obviously is, but there's a big question mark about, are we ever going to get rid of him or other authoritarians? Because we might get J.D. Vance, and he's kind of Trump with a brain, which could be even more dangerous than present incumbent. So there's a real question mark about what America's going to look like in 4 years' time. And I've got a bet on with some of my pals that the midterm elections, which lots of people think, oh, the Democrats are going to get swept back into power and it'll all be okay again and we'll go back to normal. They may not have any midterm elections. If Trump thinks he's going to lose, if he's down in the polls, if he's got troops on the streets in America everywhere, maybe he'll say, oh, under the circumstances, too much social disruption, it'd be too dangerous to have an election in these circumstances, so we're not going to bother. And given the direction of travel, that may not be such an alarmist fantasy as I would like to think it is. So who knows? As I say, at his great address to the UN the other day, which was supposed to be about a quarter of an hour long, but went on for an hour, as ever, one of the things he said was that climate change is one of the biggest con jobs the world's ever known. So with that kind of leadership, I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that we've got a few problems to think about. Here you go. Here's a moment of uplifting hope and optimism for everybody. So this is a little couple of charts. One that shows China's installed energy generating capacity. And the thing about China is it's awfully big. Everything's on this epic scale. So when it starts taking the idea of electrification seriously, it makes a big difference. And whatever you think about Xi Jinping, we were talking about in the fantastic workshop I was involved in all day with some brilliant young scholars. We were talking about Xi Jinping in passing, of course. But one thing about him, he might be a bit of an authoritarian, a bit of a bully. Some of his foreign policy might be a bit dodgy and indefensible, but he does at least talk about an ecological civilization, and he just put his money where his mouth is. There has been a huge investment in renewable technology, and China is the biggest exporter of renewable technology in the form of solar panels to the rest of the world there's ever been in history. And it's making a difference around the world. Whether it's making enough of a difference as quickly as it needs to is another question, but I don't think we can heap all the blame on China. China is still the biggest CO2 emitter in the world, just about, but it looks like it's beginning to plateau, and it may start to come down pretty quickly, given all this installed renewable energy that they've already got in place. So at least they're trying to do the right thing in China. In America, they're not even trying. They've given up. They don't care. They don't think it's a real issue. So, I mean, who are you going to be pals with in the international system if you care about the environment, America or China? I mean, clearly in this country, there is absolutely no debate about this, because neither of the major political parties could even contemplate doing anything other than being tightly wedded to the United States, in strategic terms at least. And I think Richard Miles actually thinks he may be working for the American government. I'm not sure about that, but it's just unimaginable that we could do anything other than be tightly aligned to the United States. And the idea that we might have closer, productive relations with China is absolutely unthinkable for many people in the Australian government. However, this is my big idea, which I've written about in something or other, and also my claim for the Nobel Peace Prize as well, I thought. But because if Donald Trump's in line for the Nobel Peace Prize, I mean, I've got to be in with the shout, I think, basically. But anyway, this is my big idea. This is coal-fired power stations in China. They're still building them, unfortunately. They're still using lots of coal. This is Australia's production of coal. So my big idea is China and Australia get together. They have a powwow about what should we do. We're both this is the Australian bit. It's a bit dodgy, but they have a discussion. We're both concerned about climate change, the environment, blah blah blah. What could we do together? Which is an unthinkable idea in itself, but might make a difference. What could we do together that would actually make a difference? So the deal would be Australia gives up digging up coal as soon as possible, preferably overnight. China agrees to not build any more coal-fired power stations and stop using the ones that it is using as quickly as could be done. And that wouldn't solve the environmental problem on its own, of course. It would make quite a substantial difference, given the amount of this stuff that we dig up and they use. It would make a difference. But as an example of sort of creative thinking, of unlikely alliances in the service of a useful collective cause, seems like a pretty reasonable idea to me. And given the absence of creative, thoughtful ideas that are being put forward to address this particular problem, it's not the most ludicrous one either, it seems to be. But anyway, I'll be happy to hear your thoughts and feedback about this particular idea. But I think unless we begin to think of, governments acting differently, governments acting at the kind of scale and speed that's necessary for some serious action on the environmental problems. Because in this country, you've only got to look out the window to realise how serious the environmental problems are. This country's got the distinction of being able to be on fire and underwater at the same time. I mean, that's what I call an environmental set of problems, personally. But so you would think this would be the one country in the world that will kind of get this. And in China, middle-class people in China, they're a bit concerned about the environment as well. In the big cities, they don't want their kids to be inhaling lots of pollution. So that's something that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is a little bit concerned about. They don't want social unrest being generated by climate change. So both countries have got big incentives, it seems to me, to think about doing this for the future of their own children. This is something else I can't quite understand. But just on the baby boomer thing, I mean, I'm 73, don't have any kids. What do I care about the future? I mean, I don't. People who are actually wrecking the planet, they do have kids, they do have a stake in the future. I just don't get what goes on in their minds and how people like Mark McGowan can compartmentalise his attitude to his own self-enrichment and his attitude to his kids, their future, and the future of the planet. So that's me editorialising a bit, obviously, but this is a lecture, so I do a bit of editorialising. So. But anyway, that strikes me as being a possibility. So here's some conclusions for you. Yes, I just think the quality of, this is a general point about the state of the world, and but if you look around the world, not only a lot of these people who are running at the moment are all blokes, most of them, that's one thing. I mean, I don't want to make a sweeping generalisation about women would be much better, but they couldn't be any worse, I don't think, than some of the chaps who are running the place at the moment. And a lot of them are of a certain age. I mean, what's Trump, 78 now, is he? So he's getting on. He's talking about a third term. So perish the thought. So, but anyway, so I just think, and in this country, given all our advantages, given our responsibility for creating the problem, given our, by world standards, pretty effective state capacity, I just think we've got a moral obligation to behave well and to try and do something, it seems to me. But, expecting Albo or much less the opposition to do anything serious about this is, you've got to be a bit of an optimist, it seems. When I was in China recently, doing a little lecture tour, in English, of course, but audience of lots of young people turned up, which was very inspiring and uplifting for me. And I suggested to them very carefully that I didn't say Xi Jinping's a big tosspot and you should get rid of it. That might have been a bit inflammatory. But I did say that young people in China might have more in common with their counterparts in Australia than Australian young people have in common with their leaders. So I didn't draw any, conclusions about what might be going on in China. But I did suggest to them that maybe young people have got an agenda that doesn't get reflected by the current generation of political leaders around the world. Maybe figuring out ways to connect with their counterparts in other parts of the world is a good thing to do. And Greta Thunberg is one of my big heroes, I must say. And she gets, disparaged as being, what does she know? She's a little girl, But I mean, she's of a generation and of a gender, perhaps, that kind of gets some of these things in a way that clearly some of the most powerful people in the world either don't or manage to think, well, not our problem. I'm not going to be around. We're rich. Oh, and how many of the big tech bros got their secret hideaways in New Zealand and Hawaii and all these other places? So some of those guys, and they all are, have got a pretty shrewd idea of what might happen and the limits of their kind of paradigm. And they're all preparing for it by buying up hideaways that they think will get them past the apocalypse. Good luck with that. And yes, will it take a consciousness, change of consciousness to say, this is because I'm an aging hippie, and that's the sort of thing I probably would say. But I think there's something in it, unless we do start thinking differently about the situation that we find ourselves in. I just don't think the capitalist model, individualism, they're going to get us through the kind of problems that we collectively face. And this is my little mantra, not this dummy the slightest good. Do what you can, where you can, which turns out in my case to be next to nothing. I can't even start flying about around Australia, so what do I know? So there's a lesson in hypocrisy for you all. So thank you very much.